13-year-old Caleb Johnson only wanted to learn karate and make friends when he joined the Silver Crane Dojo, but the Carter twins turned his dream into a nightmare. What they didn't know was that Caleb's father, a former Navy SEAL, was secretly training him in a different kind of strength: calm, compassion, and unbreakable will. Before we go any further, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story will make you believe in the true power of kindness. The morning fog rolled in from the Pacific, soft and silver, blurring the edges of the small Northern California town, where pine trees leaned toward the ocean, as if listening to its secrets. The air smelled faintly of salt and cedar. Beneath that mist, on a quiet street behind a sushi bar and a row of mailboxes, stood Silver Crane Dojo, an old wooden building with paper lanterns faded by years of sea wind. Inside, a dozen children stretched in neat rows, their white GI uniforms crisp, their laughter sharp against the tatami mats. Near the doorway stood Caleb Johnson, 13 years old, dark-skinned and slender, with tightly curled hair cropped short and a quiet intensity in his eyes. He clutched his new karate belt in his hands as if afraid it might disappear. He had only been in this town for 2 weeks, and this dojo, with its smell of sweat, pine oil, and tradition, was supposed to be his start at something new. Caleb's father, Eli Johnson, had suggested karate to help him learn control and confidence. Eli was a man built of silence and scars, a former Navy SEAL who walked with a faint limp and spoke like every word cost him something. Caleb adored him, feared him a little, and wanted nothing more than to make him proud. The dojo, Eli said, would teach Caleb discipline, something the military once taught him on long nights under enemy fire. "Relax your shoulders," said a soft voice. Sensei Graham, the head instructor, moved like a heron across the floor. In his late 50s, lean and tall with a white beard trimmed to precision, he had the posture of a man who still believed in control above compassion. His gray eyes studied Caleb with polite detachment, as if he were a guest rather than a student. "You're new, yes? From the city?" "Yes, sir," Caleb replied quietly. "Good. The Silver Crane teaches patience, endurance, and respect. You'll learn those in time." His tone was calm, but there was a sharpness underneath, the same sharpness that made others straighten their backs when he passed. A few older students smirked. Among them were Logan and Luke Carter, twin brothers of 15, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same storm-gray eyes and sandy blonde hair falling over their brows. Logan, the elder by minutes, wore confidence like armor. He had a small scar on his chin, a remnant of a street scuffle he once bragged about, and a grin that suggested he'd won more fights than he lost. Luke, slightly leaner, was quieter, but his silence carried a cruel kind of amusement. Where Logan taunted with words, Luke struck with precision. As Sensei Graham turned his back, Logan whispered loudly enough for the room to hear, "Hey, wrong class, kid. The basketball court's that way." He jerked a thumb towards the window, where the school gymnasium could be seen through the glass. Laughter broke across the room like breaking waves. Caleb froze. His heart hammered, but he forced himself to bow as the class had done earlier. His cheeks burned, yet he stayed silent. The twins exchanged smirks. They liked the kind of silence that meant their target wouldn't fight back. "Pair up," Sensei Graham called. "Practice form number 3. Precision over power." Caleb hesitated, scanning for a partner. Logan's grin widened. "Come on, new kid. Let's see what you got." As they faced each other, Caleb tried to steady his breathing. "Precision over power," he repeated silently. But when Logan lunged forward, his strike came too fast, too hard. Not a practice move, but a test. The blow landed on Caleb's shoulder with a dull thud, the sting radiating down his arm. He stumbled back. "Again!" Logan barked, feigning cheer. Sensei Graham glanced over but said nothing. "Control your balance, Caleb," was all he offered, as if the mistake were Caleb's alone. The next few minutes blurred into a cycle of humiliation. Every block Caleb made countered with a shove. Every movement mocked. Luke joined in, demonstrating a correction by sweeping Caleb's leg faster than the drill allowed, sending him sprawling onto the mat. The room laughed again. Something inside Caleb knotted, tight and hot. He wanted to stand up, to shout, to tell them to stop, but his father's voice echoed in his head. "Stay calm under pressure, son. Anger is a luxury soldiers can't afford." So he stood, bowed again, and whispered, "I'm fine." The words tasted like metal in his mouth. By the end of class, his GI was wrinkled, his palms scraped raw from the mat. When Sensei dismissed them, Caleb changed quickly, hoping to slip out unnoticed. But as he tied his sneakers, Logan passed by and slapped the back of his head. "Hey, good work, rookie. Maybe next time try not to fall so much." Luke chuckled softly. "Or do. It's kind of your thing." Caleb said nothing. He pulled his hood up and stepped outside, the fog cool against his bruised skin. The laughter from inside followed him down the sidewalk until it faded beneath the sound of gulls crying overhead. Outside the dojo, the world felt bigger and lonelier. He could almost hear the waves crashing against the distant cliffs, that endless rhythm of rise and fall, as if the sea itself were telling him, "You'll have to learn to endure." At home, Eli was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee steaming beside a stack of military books. The faint smell of gun oil and salt clung to him like a second skin. He looked up when Caleb entered. "How was class?" Eli asked, voice even. Caleb forced a small smile. "It was good. We practiced basics." Eli nodded. "Basics make masters." He didn't look up again. Caleb went to his room, shutting the door softly. He peeled off his hoodie and stared at the faint red marks on his shoulder in the mirror. They'd fade by morning. They always did. But the ache underneath, the one that told him he didn't belong, stayed. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the worn photograph on his nightstand. His father in uniform, standing beside his SEAL team, faces blurred by dust and sunlight. Those men looked unbreakable. Caleb wondered if his father ever felt small the way he did now. Outside, the fog thickened, wrapping the town in quiet. Somewhere down the road, the lanterns at Silver Crane flickered in the wind, their paper sides trembling as if whispering secrets. Caleb lay awake for hours, listening to the ocean's steady breathing through his open window. He promised himself he wouldn't tell his father. Not yet. He just needed time. Time to get stronger. Time to prove that he could endure like the soldiers in the picture frame. But deep down, under the ache and the silence, a tiny spark had started to burn, not of anger, but of determination. The days passed in gray repetition. Morning fog, the chill of sea air, the muted hum of life in the coastal town. For Caleb Johnson, each sunrise meant returning to the Silver Crane Dojo, where discipline was praised but cruelty was ignored. The dojo's walls had begun to feel like another battlefield, one without bullets but filled with silent wounds. Every class, he stepped onto the tatami floor knowing what awaited him. Logan's mocking smirk, Luke's precise, punishing strikes, and Sensei Graham's distant indifference. Caleb never fought back. He believed that enduring made him stronger, that silence could be armor. But silence, he was learning, also hurt. At home, the contrast was stark. Their small house sat near the cliffs where waves crashed endlessly below. Inside, the furniture was plain. the air heavy with the faint smell of salt and gun oil. Eli Johnson, his father, had kept the house as he kept himself, orderly, functional, and bare of sentiment. Every photo on the wall was military, men in combat gear, faces half hidden by helmets and dust, sunlight falling like forgiveness across their shoulders. Only one photo showed a smile. Eli holding baby Caleb, back when life still had warmth. Caleb's evenings were filled with quiet. He'd practice alone in his room, repeating stances, whispering the counting words in Japanese under his breath. Ichi, nai, san, shai. His small fists moved like shadows, striking the air that gave no resistance. Sweat dripped from his temple, darkening the floorboards. Each punch carried more desperation than strength. At school, he stayed invisible. No one noticed the bruises under his sleeves. His teacher, Mrs. Delaney, a middle-aged woman with soft curls and kind but distracted eyes, praised his discipline and quietness. "You're very mature for your age," she said once, not realizing it wasn't maturity. It was fear held together by pride. One afternoon, the universe cracked. The dojo was quieter than usual. The twins, Logan and Luke Carter, had returned from a weekend tournament with new medals glinting against their gis. Sensei Graham gathered the class, praising them as the pride of Silver Crane. Caleb clapped like everyone else, his palms numb. He noticed how proud Graham's smile was, how his voice carried warmth only for the winners. When the class resumed, Graham paired the twins with Caleb for sparring. "You'll learn from the best," the instructor said, tone deceptively calm. Logan's grin was sharp. "We'll go easy on him." They didn't. Within seconds, Logan struck too hard, Luke swept too low. Caleb hit the mat, breath knocked out of him. He tried to rise, but Luke's leg shot out again, catching him in the ribs. Pain bloomed through his chest like fire. He heard laughter, quick, cruel, and then Graham's voice. "Stay focused. Mistakes make better students." When Caleb's lip split open, a single drop of blood hit the mat. That was when everything went silent. Through the glass doors at the far end of the dojo, a tall figure stood in the doorway. Eli Johnson. His expression didn't change, but his presence was like a blade through the air. He had come early, just by chance, after his shift at the harbor maintenance yard. He had meant only to watch, to surprise his son. What he saw instead froze him. Eli stepped forward, boots echoing across the wooden floor. His eyes, dark and steady, swept over the twins, then to Sensei Graham. "That," he said, his voice low, "isn't teaching." The dojo fell silent. Graham straightened, his tone still cool. "Mr. Johnson, your son needs to learn control. Discipline sometimes looks like—" "Abuse," Eli interrupted. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. Years of command had carved authority into every word. "If that's your version of discipline, then you've never taught real warriors." Logan took a half step back. Luke lowered his gaze. The other students stared at the floor. Graham's jaw tightened. "You're welcome to withdraw your son from this dojo if you disapprove of my methods." Eli looked at Caleb, then back to Graham. "I'll talk to my son first." They walked home in silence. The road wound past the cliffs, where seagulls circled like pale ghosts. Caleb wanted to speak, to explain, but shame held his tongue. When they reached the porch, Eli finally said, "Inside." At the kitchen table, the air felt too still. Eli set his coffee mug down carefully, as if weighing every motion. "Tell me everything." Caleb hesitated. His throat tightened. He spoke quietly, words trembling at first, then stronger. He told him about the twins, the jeers, the bruises, the laughter of the other kids, and how Sensei Graham had done nothing. When he finished, silence filled the kitchen. Eli leaned back, eyes half closed. His face, weathered from years of sun and battle, softened. "You didn't tell me because you didn't want me to fight your battles," he said. Caleb nodded. "I just wanted to be strong like you." Eli looked at him for a long time, and something flickered behind his eyes. Pain. Pride, maybe both. "Strength isn't what people think it is," he said quietly. "In war, I met men who could lift twice my weight, shoot straighter, run farther. But some of them broke at the first loss. Strength is knowing when to stand your ground, and when to endure." He reached across the table, resting his scarred hand over Caleb's. "You're not wrong for wanting to be strong. You just need to learn what kind of strong matters." That night, Eli stayed up long after Caleb went to bed. He sat on the porch, cigarette ember glowing faintly in the mist. He remembered his last deployment, an ambush in the mountains of Afghanistan, where he'd lost a friend named Mason. Mason had been the toughest man he knew, all muscle and bravado, until the moment came when he had to make a choice between revenge and restraint. Mason hadn't chosen restraint, and it had cost him his life. Eli took a long breath. He could still hear Mason's last words. "Don't let anger make your choices." He exhaled slowly, crushed the cigarette beneath his boot, and looked at the dark sea. "You'll learn the right kind of strength, son," he murmured. "I'll make sure of it." Inside, Caleb dreamed of water. Cold, endless water. He was sinking, fists clenched, lungs burning. Then a hand, his father's, reached down through the current and pulled him toward the surface. He woke with tears he couldn't explain. The next morning, when Eli dropped him at school, he didn't speak about the dojo. But before Caleb stepped out, his father said one thing. "We'll talk tonight. I've got something to show you." For the first time in weeks, Caleb felt something unfamiliar, a small, steady hope flickering inside the ache. He didn't know what his father meant, but the tone in his voice carried weight, like the sound of an oath. As the day stretched on, the fog lifted from the town, revealing a sharp blue sky. The ocean below the cliffs glimmered with light. Caleb didn't know it yet, but this was the day everything began to change, the day when pain would turn to purpose and silence to strength. The morning began cold and bright, the kind of brightness that carried no warmth. Mist still clung to the pine trees behind the Silver Crane Dojo as Eli Johnson stepped out of his truck and closed the door with a muted thud. He wore his old Navy SEAL field jacket, faded at the shoulders, the embroidered insignia nearly rubbed away by time. His boots were scuffed, his knuckles calloused, his hair touched with gray at the temples. The look in his eyes was steady, calm in the way only soldiers learn to be when everything inside them is burning. He crossed the gravel lot and entered the dojo. The wooden floor creaked under his weight, the scent of incense and old sweat mingling in the air. Sensei Graham was arranging trophies on a shelf, their brass surfaces catching the sunlight that slipped through the rice paper windows. He turned at the sound of Eli's steps, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Johnson," Graham said, adjusting his black belt with deliberate calm. "What can I do for you?" Eli's voice was low but unwavering. "You can start by explaining why my son comes home with bruises from his training. He's not learning discipline here. He's being punished." Graham raised an eyebrow. "Punished?" His tone carried the faintest smirk, the condescension of a man too accustomed to being obeyed. "Your boy is simply learning the art of resilience. Some children take longer to adapt to structure." Eli took one step closer. The faint scar running across his left cheek, the one he'd earned from shrapnel years ago, caught the light. "I've seen what real structure looks like, Sensei. It doesn't involve letting two older students use a smaller kid as a punching bag." For a moment, Graham's jaw tightened, but he quickly masked it with indifference. Perhaps Caleb needs thicker skin. This world isn't kind, Mr. Johnson. The dojo teaches them to face it. Eli's voice dropped like distant thunder. The world isn't kind, but it's my job to teach my son to rise above cruelty, not accept it as training. Graham exhaled through his nose, already turning back toward his trophies. If you disapprove of my methods, you're welcome to withdraw him. We have a waiting list of students who appreciate discipline. Eli stood in silence for several seconds. The air between them was sharp as a blade. Then he said, "He'll stay, he'll learn, but not the lesson you think." Graham turned back, puzzled. Meaning? Eli gave a small, humorless smile. "You'll see." And with that, he left. Outside, the town was stirring to life. The smell of baked bread from the nearby cafe, the sound of gulls circling overhead. Eli paused beside his truck, resting both hands on the steering wheel before starting the engine. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered. Lines deeper, eyes heavier. For a brief moment, he thought of his late wife, Naomi, a woman of gentle grace and quiet, strength. She'd had warm brown skin and hair that curled just at her shoulders, always smelling faintly of lavender. She had once told him, "Teach Caleb kindness first, strength second. One without the other breaks a man." He could still hear her voice, soft as wind through reeds. He muttered under his breath, "I'll do it, Naomi, just in my way." Back at home, Caleb sat on the porch steps, backpack at his feet. He was dressed for school but lost in thought, tracing circles on the wooden railing with his finger. His lower lip was still slightly swollen from the last fall. When he saw his father's truck pull up, he straightened instinctively. Eli got out, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You ready for school?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said quietly. Eli studied him for a moment, the boy's shoulders a little too tense, eyes a little too old for 13. He nodded toward the truck. "Let's go." The drive was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the distant rush of waves beyond the cliffs. Halfway down the road, they passed Officer Raymond Dale, the town's deputy sheriff, directing morning traffic. Dale was a broad man in his late 40s with sandy hair, a thick mustache, and a gut that spoke of too many late-night coffees and donuts. He waved at Eli as they passed. "Morning, Johnson," Dale called out. "Still keeping the peace?" Eli lifted a hand in return. "Trying to." Dale laughed. "You ever think of rejoining? Sheriff could use a man who still knows how to aim straight." "Those days are done," Eli replied, voice calm. But as he drove on, the words sat heavy in his chest. He'd said them before, but each time they sounded less convincing. At the school drop-off, Caleb hesitated before stepping out. "Dad?" he said. "Yeah? Are you mad?" Eli's face softened just slightly. "No, but I'm not letting this go either." Caleb nodded, uncertain what that meant, and closed the door. Eli watched him walk toward the entrance, small figure swallowed by the crowd, and something inside him tightened. After the school run, Eli returned home but didn't go inside. He walked past the fence to the small shed behind their house. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. Weights, ropes, old sandbags, and a tarnished punching dummy from his SEAL training days. Dust clung to everything like memory. He stood in the doorway, breathing in the scent of old leather and rust. A movement at his feet startled him. A stray dog, small, scruffy, with mottled brown fur and a torn ear, had found shelter there. The animal stared up at him, ribs faintly visible beneath its coat. Its eyes were wary but intelligent. Eli crouched down slowly, palm open. "Easy, boy." The dog hesitated, then sniffed his hand and licked it once. Eli smiled faintly. "Guess we're both strays now." He poured some water into an old bowl and set out leftovers from the fridge. The dog ate quickly, tail, thumping once against the floor before settling near the wall. Eli watched it for a long time. "Name's Duke," he said quietly. "You can stay." That evening, when Caleb returned from school, he found his father outside by the shed. The dog barked once, low and friendly. Caleb blinked. "You got a dog?" "He found us," Eli said. "Guess he's staying for a while." Caleb knelt, letting Duke sniff his hand. The boy's smile, small but genuine, was the first in days. Eli watched them, then said, "We start tonight." "Start what?" Caleb asked. "Something better than what they're teaching you at that dojo." The boy's eyes widened slightly. "I mean you're going to learn how to stand tall, no matter who's in front of you." The sun had started to set, the sky turning gold and red over the horizon. The sound of the sea reached them faintly, steady and timeless. Duke settled beside the porch, tail flicking. Eli looked toward the cliffs, the wind catching the edge of his jacket. "They think strength is about hitting harder," he murmured, almost to himself. "We'll teach them it's about standing longer." Caleb didn't yet understand, but he nodded anyway. Somewhere deep inside, that small, steady spark from before began to grow. And so, as the last light faded over the ocean, a new kind of training began, one that wouldn't happen in a dojo, but under the roof of a home where love was quiet and strength was earned, not taught. The moon rose pale and full above the Johnson house, washing the backyard in silver. The air was cold enough to make each breath visible, and the ocean wind carried the faint tang of salt. Out behind the house, the light from a single hanging bulb flickered above an old punching bag swaying gently in the breeze. Beside it stood Eli Johnson, sleeves rolled up, his rough hands wrapped in faded gauze. His face looked carved from stone under the moonlight, the scars across his knuckles gleaming like pale threads. Across from him, barefoot on the grass, stood Caleb, small and tense, fists trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. Duke, their scruffy brown dog, lay curled at the porch steps, tail flicking lazily, eyes alert and glinting gold under the light. Eli adjusted the punching bag's strap, then turned to his son. "Before we start," he said, "you need to understand something." His voice carried the authority of a man used to being obeyed, yet there was warmth beneath it. "In the SEALs, we trained to survive the impossible. But surviving wasn't about strength. It was about control. The ones who panicked died first. The ones who breathed lived." Caleb nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. "So I just stay calm?" Eli gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sounds easy, doesn't it? But calm isn't silence, it's focus." He crouched low, motioning for Caleb to do the same. "Your body can shake, your heart can pound, but your mind stays steady. That's the difference between fear and power." He showed him how to plant his feet, heels rooted, knees bent, shoulders loose. You don't fight by muscling through, you fight by reading the rhythm. Caleb tried to mimic him. His movements were clumsy, his stance uneven. Eli circled him slowly. "You're thinking too much. Feel it. Breathe with the world, not against it." For the next hour, the backyard became a training ground. Eli taught him how to pivot without losing balance, how to strike without overextending, how to let the opponent's energy betray them. He demonstrated a simple parry, quick and fluid, his movements precise despite the stiffness in his left leg. Caleb followed again and again until his arms ached and sweat slicked his forehead. When the boy faltered, Eli's voice was firm but never cruel. "Don't rush. Control comes from patience." They moved in silence except for the rhythmic thump of fists hitting the old bag. Occasionally, Duke barked once, startled by the sound, then settled again, watching. As the night deepened, the moon climbed higher, silvering everything, the trees, the sandbags, even the faint scars on Eli's forearms. After an hour, he called for a break. Caleb sank onto the grass, chest heaving. His father handed him a bottle of water and sat beside him, stretching his sore knee. "Why'd you stop teaching?" Caleb asked suddenly. Eli took a slow drink before answering. "I didn't stop. I just started teaching differently. I used to train men for war. Now I'm training you for life." Caleb looked down, embarrassed. "At the dojo, they said I was weak." Eli smiled faintly. "Good. Let them think that. Weakness makes people careless. They'll underestimate you. That's your first weapon." From the house next door, a light flicked on. Their neighbor, Mrs. Ortiz, stepped onto her porch, drawn by the sound of the punching bag. She was a small, round woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair tied in a bun and an ever-present cardigan around her shoulders. Her late husband had been a fisherman, and she still spoke with the rhythmic accent of coastal Mexico. She squinted across the yard and called softly, "You two training for the Olympics or for war?" Eli chuckled. "Little of both, ma'am." She smiled knowingly. "Then don't break that boy before breakfast." Caleb laughed, and Eli nodded. "I'll try not to." As she went back inside, Eli turned serious again. "Back on your feet." They returned to drills, the air alive with the rhythm of motion. Eli showed him how to react instead of anticipate, how to let instinct take over. He'd step in, feint a strike, and Caleb had to move, block, or redirect. At first, the boy flinched, reacting with panic rather than purpose, but Eli repeated each movement until flinching became reflex, and reflex became clarity. "When you're afraid," Eli said, "your brain screams. Your job is to whisper back." "How?" Caleb asked, panting. "By breathing. Every exhale tells your body you're still in control." He demonstrated, striking the bag in rhythm with his breaths, short, measured, steady. Caleb imitated him, and though his punches were smaller, they began to carry precision. Minutes became hours. The wind picked up, carrying the distant crash of the waves. Duke rose, stretching, and trotted closer, sniffing at their feet before curling beside Caleb's sneakers. His quiet presence seemed to anchor them both. When the final round ended, Eli raised a hand. "That's enough for tonight." Caleb, dripping with sweat, looked up. "Already?" Eli nodded toward the horizon, where the moon hung directly above the ocean. "You don't win strength overnight. You build it piece by piece." They stood side by side, breathing in the cold, salt air. The light caught Caleb's face, still young, still uncertain but steadier now. His hands were red, his body sore, yet something in his eyes had changed. Eli studied him, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You're starting to move like a fighter." Caleb shook his head. "I'm not fighting. I just don't want to be afraid anymore." "That's the same thing," Eli said quietly. From the porch, the screen door creaked. Mrs. Ortiz's cat, a long-haired gray creature named Saul, slinked through the fence and joined Duke under the light. The dog wagged his tail, and the cat pretended not to notice, curling into a dignified ball. Eli watched them with a faint smile. "See that? Even the dog and the cat found peace." Caleb grinned. "Maybe they just got tired." "Or maybe they're smart enough to rest after the fight," Eli replied. The boy nodded, his laughter fading into a calm silence. The two of them stood there for a long time, the only sounds the whisper of the sea and the soft creak of the swaying bag. To anyone passing by, it was just a father and son training beneath the moonlight. But in that quiet yard, something deeper was happening. Discipline replacing fear, and confidence rising where shame had been. Eli rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Remember this feeling," he said. "It's not the strength of your fists that matters. It's the quiet that comes after. That's where power lives." Caleb met his father's gaze and nodded. He didn't fully understand yet, but the words settled into him like seeds waiting for spring. When they finally went inside, Duke followed them, tail wagging lazily. The bulb over the yard flickered once, then went out, leaving only the silver glow of the moon. In the silence that followed, the night itself seemed to hold its breath, as if watching a new warrior being born. Summer arrived with the smell of salt and dust, the kind that clung to every open window in the small coastal town. The days had stretched long and bright, and with them came the Silver Crane Dojo's annual summer tournament, an event that pulled in parents, students, and old alumni alike. The wooden hall had been swept spotless, paper lanterns hung from the rafters, and the faint notes of traditional flute music drifted through the air. By the time the tournament began, the sun had slipped just low enough to bathe everything in amber light. Caleb Johnson, now leaner and sharper after a month of late-night training, stood among the younger competitors. His GI was simple, white and uncreased, the belt tied neatly around his waist. His hands, once clumsy, now moved with quiet precision. Even the way he breathed was different. Steady, measured, like the rhythm of the tide that had become his teacher. Across the mat, Logan and Luke Carter stood side by side, smirking as always. Their matching white uniforms gleamed, their brown belts knotted in pride. Logan, slightly broader, cracked his knuckles with the confidence of a lion before a hunt. Luke, leaner and more calculating, tilted his head toward Caleb. "So the rookie's back," Logan said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Ready to get tossed again?" Caleb looked at them, calm but not cold. "I'm ready to learn," he said simply. The remark landed strangely in the air, not defiant, not submissive, just honest. At the front of the hall, Sensei Graham stood observing with his usual unreadable expression. His gray beard caught the light, and his hands clasped behind his back. "Very well," he said. "Let's make this interesting. One-on-one sparring. Caleb versus Logan Carter. Controlled match. First to 3 points." His voice echoed, firm and ceremonial. Among the crowd, whispers rippled. Most didn't know Caleb. Those who did thought he'd last a minute at best. When the bell rang, Logan came at him like thunder. His movements were fast and heavy, the kind of strength that looked impressive but lacked patience. Caleb didn't retreat. He shifted. Every step backward became a redirection, every dodge timed with his breath. Eli's words echoed in his mind. "Don't fight the wave. Become the wave." Logan swung again, overextending. Caleb turned his body just enough to let the punch pass, then used his opponent's momentum to step inside. His palm met Logan's chest. Not a strike, but a controlled redirection. Logan stumbled backward, caught off guard by the balance in the boy's motion. "Point 1, Caleb," announced Mr. Haiga, the assistant instructor and referee, a short Okinawan man in his late 40s with close-cropped black hair streaked with gray. He had once trained in Japan and carried himself with quiet dignity, his presence alone silencing the students. The crowd murmured. Logan's smirk faded. From the sidelines, Luke's jaw tightened. The next round began. Logan's attacks grew faster, angrier. Sweat glistened on his forehead. He lunged with a roundhouse kick. Perfect form but predictable. Caleb sidestepped, his body fluid, and caught the kick under his arm, turning it into a graceful sweep that brought Logan down with a dull thud. The audience gasped. Even Sensei Graham's eyes narrowed slightly. "Point 2, Caleb." Logan climbed back to his feet, breathing hard. His cheeks flushed red. You think you're better than me now? Caleb shook his head. No, I just learned from you. For a moment, Logan hesitated. The words disarmed him in a way no strike could. But pride burned too deep. He attacked again, reckless and loud, his GI snapping with every punch. Caleb moved like water. One step, one turn, one breath. When the opening came, it was small but clear. Caleb pivoted, using the rotation of his body to redirect Logan's weight. In a motion both swift and gentle, he brought his opponent down again, this time without force, his palm holding Logan's shoulder to keep him from hitting the ground too hard. Point 3, Caleb. Match over. Silence filled the dojo, the kind of silence that follows something no one expected. Logan lay still for a heartbeat, chest heaving, then looked up at Caleb's hand, still resting on him. Steady, not triumphant. Caleb bowed slightly. Thank you for the match. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Even the parents in the crowd, who'd barely noticed him before, began to murmur admiration. Then Luke stepped forward, voice sharp. That was luck. He couldn't handle both of us. Sensei Graham raised a brow. Are you volunteering for another match, Luke? Luke hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Sensei. The crowd stirred again. A double match wasn't normal, but Graham's eyes glinted with interest. Very well. Controlled sparring, no strikes to the head. Begin. Luke came in differently from his brother. Quiet, methodical. He tested Caleb's defense, probing for weakness. The two circled each other like dancers. Caleb matched every move, every feint. His breathing stayed calm, his feet light. When Luke finally lunged, Caleb didn't counter. Instead, he let Luke's arm pass, using the movement to shift their momentum. The next instant, Luke found himself locked in a hold that stopped just short of pain. Caleb held the position for a heartbeat, then released it. You're good, he said softly. I don't want to hurt you. The entire dojo fell silent again. Luke rose slowly, his pride caught between anger and respect. He bowed stiffly. You won, he said, voice low. Caleb bowed in return. We both did. At the edge of the room, Eli Johnson stood in the doorway, having arrived unnoticed. He leaned against the frame, his arms crossed, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The lines on his face softened with quiet pride. After the match, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing until it filled the hall. Mrs. Ortiz, who had come to watch her grandson compete in another division, clapped the loudest. Eso, niño, that's how you do it, she shouted, her voice proud and warm. Even Sensei Graham, though his face stayed unreadable, inclined his head slightly. Respect is earned through action, he said. Today Caleb Johnson earned it. Caleb bowed again, heart pounding but steady. He turned and caught his father's gaze. Eli nodded once. No words, no theatrics, just understanding. As the crowd dispersed, Logan approached. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mockery this time. You're not bad, kid, he muttered, rubbing his sore shoulder. Caleb smiled faintly. You taught me more than you think. Luke gave a small, reluctant grin. Guess we'll have to train harder. Guess we all will, Caleb replied. Outside, the late afternoon sun spilled gold over the rooftops. The wind off the ocean carried the scent of salt and triumph. Duke waited by the truck, tail wagging, as if sensing victory. Caleb scratched behind his ears, and for a moment everything felt lighter, like the world itself had decided to exhale. As they drove home, Eli finally spoke. You did well. Caleb turned to him. You saw. Eli nodded. Every move. You fought with control. That's what real strength looks like. The boy looked out the window at the glowing horizon. I didn't want to hurt them. You didn't, Eli said. You changed them. The sun sank behind the cliffs, casting long shadows over the water. And for the first time since he'd entered the dojo, Caleb felt no fear, only calm, the kind that came from knowing he had faced the storm and found peace within it. The night was soft, washed in silver. The sea stretched wide and dark before them, the tide breathing in slow rhythm like a sleeping giant. Father and son sat on a weathered log at the edge of the dunes, the same place where Eli had once come alone to think after the war. Now, beside him, Caleb sat with his knees drawn up, his GI pants still faintly streaked with dust from the tournament floor. The only sound was the low hiss of the ocean, broken occasionally by the bark of Duke, chasing shadows of waves and wind. Caleb's voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the night. "Dad," he said, "I won today. Everyone clapped, but I didn't feel happy." Eli turned his head slightly, studying his son in the moonlight. The boy's face, once so small and uncertain, had begun to sharpen, not just in bone, but in spirit. "That's because you learned something winning can't give you," Eli said. His voice carried a low roughness, softened by years of holding too many unspoken truths. "You didn't fight to beat them. You fought to understand yourself. That's what changes you." Caleb frowned, turning a small seashell over in his fingers. "But they were mean, Dad. For so long. I wanted to show them they were wrong." "You did," Eli said simply, "but not by breaking them, by stopping before you could." He watched the boy absorb that, his eyes reflecting the pale shimmer of moonlight on the water. "Martial arts, real martial arts," Eli continued, "isn't about who you can knock down. It's about who you refuse to become in the process." They sat there until the tide crept closer, washing foam across their boots. For the first time, Caleb didn't shrink from the sound of the ocean. He breathed with it. The following week, the Silver Crane Dojo was different. Sensei Graham arrived early every day, his crisp uniform as immaculate as ever, but his demeanor had shifted. The stoic pride he wore like armor now carried humility beneath it. The walls of the dojo had seen something pure, a student who had mirrored the true essence of discipline, not through victory, but through restraint. It was Mrs. Ortiz, ever the observant neighbor, who first noticed the change. When she brought her grandson Mateo to his Saturday class, she paused at the sight of a new banner above the entrance: "Respect and Equality in Martial Arts." Beneath it stood Graham himself, greeting each student personally, something he had never done before. Logan and Luke Carter were already inside, their usual swagger replaced by quiet determination. Both had been humbled by the match, not humiliated, but awakened. They bowed to Caleb as he entered, not out of formality, but out of genuine respect. "Glad you showed up," Logan said, adjusting his belt. "We were hoping you'd help us with that counter you used." Caleb smiled, shy but warm. "Sure," he said, "but only if you teach me that spinning kick." Luke chuckled. "Deal." From the doorway, Sensei Graham watched the exchange. His eyes, often sharp and judging, softened. He turned to Mr. Higa, who had remained the quiet backbone of the dojo. The assistant instructor had noticed the same transformation. "You see that?" Graham murmured. "They're learning the part I forgot to teach." Mr. Higa, whose lined face seemed carved from patience itself, nodded. "Sometimes the best lessons are the ones our students teach us." That same week, Eli received a visit from Officer Dale, the deputy sheriff. Dale was in his usual brown uniform, sunglasses hanging from the front pocket, his stance slightly relaxed, but his eyes as sharp as ever. "Heard about the tournament," he said, leaning against Eli's porch rail. "Your boy made half the town proud. The school's been talking about him nonstop." Eli smiled faintly. "He's learning the right kind of fight." Dale nodded. That's what I came to ask about. The community center's starting a self-defense program for kids, mostly teaching them how to handle bullies, stay safe, that kind of thing. They want someone who knows more than textbook moves. You interested? Eli hesitated. It had been years since he'd stood in front of a class. The idea stirred both nostalgia and caution. You want a teacher? He said. Or a soldier? Dale grinned. Someone who knows the difference. That night, Eli accepted. When Caleb found out, he was ecstatic. You're going to teach again, he said, eyes bright. Can I help? Help? Eli raised an eyebrow. You think you're ready to teach? Caleb grinned. I've got a pretty good teacher. Eli chuckled, ruffling his hair. All right, you can assist, but we do this my way. Slow, patient, and no showing off. Days turned into weeks. The Johnson backyard, once a lonely space of grief and discipline, became a gathering place for laughter and learning. Kids from the neighborhood, shy, curious, sometimes scared, came after school to learn from Eli and Caleb. Among them was Maya Thompson, a small girl of 10 with a hearing aid and a fierce sense of curiosity. Her dark curls bounced when she moved, and her brown eyes glowed with determination. She had been bullied at school for her speech impediment, but Eli noticed that behind her hesitation was resilience. You move fast, he told her one afternoon after she perfectly dodged a mock strike. She smiled, signing clumsily with her hands. You move slow. Caleb laughed, translating, and Eli grinned. Touché, he said. The training became more than physical. It became community, a bridge between generations, between differences. Even Mrs. Ortiz would sometimes bring snacks, and Duke, now healthier and strong, acted as the group's guardian, trotting around to check on each child. Meanwhile, at Silver Crane, Sensei Graham began inviting Eli to occasional workshops. It was awkward at first. Two men who had once stood on opposite ends of a moral line now sharing the same mat. But mutual respect grew. I was wrong, Graham admitted one evening after class. The dojo was empty, the air thick with the scent of pine polish. I thought toughness made better students, but all it did was make me forget why I started teaching. Eli nodded slowly. Discipline without compassion is just control. But you already fixed that. Graham looked out the window, where the last light of day touched the horizon. Maybe. Or maybe I just got reminded by the right student. By autumn, the town had changed, too. The story of the quiet boy who stood his ground, not by anger but by grace, spread beyond the dojo. The local newspaper even ran a small article titled, From Silence to Strength, The Boy Who Changed His Dojo. Caleb hated the attention, but Eli smiled quietly when he saw it. One crisp morning, sunlight spilled across the field behind their house. The grass shimmered with dew. Caleb, taller now, stood alone in his GI, practicing slow movements with a focus that seemed older than his years. Eli watched from the porch, coffee in hand. You've come a long way, he said. Caleb didn't stop moving. You think so? Eli nodded. I do, but remember, true strength isn't in what you can do. It's in what you choose not to, Caleb finished softly, smiling. Eli's heart lifted at that. For the first time in years, he felt peace, the kind that comes when a father sees his lessons take root. The wind picked up, rustling the pines. Duke barked once, chasing a gull that swooped too low. Sewell the cat watched lazily from Mrs. Ortiz's fence, unimpressed. The world went on, simple and whole. And somewhere in that small coastal town, beneath the endless sound of waves, the story of a boy and his father, of restraint, respect, and quiet power, became not just a lesson in martial arts, but a testament to how peace, once learned, could echo louder than any fight. At the end of this story, One truth remains, that strength without kindness is hollow, and mercy is the greatest form of power. Sometimes the miracles we seek don't arrive as thunder or light from heaven. They come quietly, in a father's patience, a child's forgiveness, and the courage to choose peace over pride. Perhaps that is God's way of working, through ordinary people who, by love and endurance, make the world gentler. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that faith still lives in small acts of grace. Leave a comment, subscribe for more stories of hope, and may God bless you and everyone who carries kindness into the battles of everyday life.